Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Compliance Success Stories, Swift, PCI, and Healthcare. Today's event is brought to you by Illumio and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. Now, we want this to be a very educational event. We want you to learn as much as possible about compliance and microsegmentation. So I encourage you to use the GoToWebinar questions box to ask as many questions as you'd like. And we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event. But I encourage you to get your questions in early, and we have experts from Illumio standing by to answer those questions now. We also have two handouts that you can download in the GoToWebinar control panel. The first one is a research report on the Illumio Adaptive Security Platform and how it supports PCI DSS requirements. The second handout is on mapping the Illumio ASP to the Swift Customer Security Control Framework in 2019. So make sure you download those handouts. And finally, for one lucky attendee on today's event, we have a $300 Amazon gift card. I'm sorry if you're watching this event on demand, that drawing has already occurred. Full prize terms and conditions can be found at our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. The winner of the gift card must submit an IRS Form W-9. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce today's presenter. We're joined by Katie Wood, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Illumio. Katie, thanks for being on, and take it away.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks everybody for joining today. In this webinar, we're going to talk about compliance success stories in meeting regulatory requirements for Swift, PCI, HIPAA, and more with security segmentation. First, we'll set the stage with some background on why all these compliance mandates are coming down for better security. We'll talk about what security segmentation actually is and how it works, how to have a successful deployment, and then we'll get into some of the customer case studies of people who've done just that. So why is it important that we have security segmentation in the first place? Why is it being mandated through regulation? Well, security segmentation has come to the fore in the last few years, not only because of the threat landscape and the risk of breach, but because of how our IT environments are changing. The pace of technology is accelerating to keep up with the need for speed in the business, and that means more complexity and more diversity to our environments. But we still need to be able to protect everything adequately. So how are our environments changing? You see here the figure 1, applications are dynamic. We've got containers and the move to a DevOps motion. We've got microservices with the disintegration of monolithic apps. We've got the ease with which you can spin up and spin down workloads in public clouds, essentially ephemeral workloads. All of these factors mean the picture is a lot more dynamic, as we see in the first figure. Likewise, with all this change, we still have our existing infrastructure, meaning we are increasingly heterogeneous, bare metal, virtualized, containerized. Number 3, workloads are distributed globally across data centers. And lastly, throw in hybrid and multi-cloud for good measure. We're all familiar with rapid cloud adoption. IDG predicted in 2018 that IT environments were moving from nearly half cloud in 2018 last year to more than 2/3 by 2020 next year. And a lot of that will be public cloud. So as our environments have gotten more dynamic and complex, we also face greater security threats and need to govern all of these different environments consistently. Our environments have grown outside the data center and our own networks, yet we're still relying on traditional perimeter security tied to the network. For a more current posture, we really need our security to run on anywhere on anything. We need agility. Many people have moved to a DevOps model to push applications out faster, and traditional security can't keep up. We have a much expanded attack surface due to the cloud and more of our environment being outside of our data centers and networks. And this means security is not just at the perimeter. We live in an age where we have to assume breach. It's a fact of life for businesses and governments that attacks will happen and the perimeter can be breached. So the question is really, how can you adequately protect your applications behind the firewall, inside the perimeter, and prevent attackers from moving between applications from low-value assets to high-value assets as they go? So this is not just a theoretical question. More regulators have taken note of the fallout from breaches at the industry and even global level. This week, actually, there were large GDPR fines handed down for Marriott and for British Airways, which we'll talk about in a second. The status quo of noncompliance is really not an option with these kind of punitive financial stings. So regulations like SWIFT or GDPR mandate compliance with standards for protecting critical data and preparing for breaches by arming your network. Here in the figure on the slide, we see some more additional regulations aimed at consumer privacy, national security, protection of industries like finance or critical infrastructure. And the penalties here included vary from the risk of being excluded from industry standard systems required to participate in banking in the case of SWIFT, the SWIFT messaging system. Or in the case of GDPR, you can accrue fines calculated by revenue with a cap of 4% of total annual turnover. So just this week, we saw British Airways was fined for their breach last year, $230 million for GDPR. And similarly, Marriott was fined for their breach last year, $123 million. One of the most prominent and expensive breaches of the last few years was aimed directly at taking money from the banking consortium network called the SWIFT network. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, and it controls how financial institutions send and receive information about transactions around the world. Here you see an article on this breach from the New York Times calling it the billion-dollar bank job. So how did it happen? This diagram is a post-mortem on the attack from a Bangladeshi newspaper. The bank in question made the SWIFT network vulnerable by connecting it to other systems on the network, which were accessed by hackers who moved within the network to SWIFT, the SWIFT messaging system, and intercepted it, sending fake calls for trades to transfer $1 billion in currency. If you look here at the diagram, the red arrows in the diagram show the vulnerable path between SWIFT and the other systems, something that SWIFT decided to address with regulation going into effect this year, 2019. So the fallout of this breach created new compliance standards for global banks in the SWIFT network that mandate isolating critical applications from the rest of your network, also known as security segmentation, which is what we're going to talk about for the remainder of the webinar. So what is security segmentation? Well, let's drill down on that for 1 second. Let's take a look at how the technology works to prevent the spread of breaches. If you think of your network as one of these submarines, the one on the left has a very strong perimeter, but it has no segmentation inside to separate different parts of the craft in case of the breach. If it's damaged by a torpedo, it could go down. If you're carrying some kind of ammunition that explodes internally, the entire craft could sink. By comparison, the one on the right can potentially take on damage in any one portion without compromising the rest of the craft. Its attack surface for any given breach is greatly reduced. If it is breached, whether internally or externally, only one compartment is damaged, and there's a greater likelihood that it will survive intact. Another way to think about this, for those of you who travel a lot, is like your hotel room. Most hotels have security at their elevators now to limit which floor you can go to. You're given your card key from the front desk, and from there you need to use it for your elevator, for the room, floor, for your room, for the fitness center, for the pool, for the club. But imagine if the only key to the hotel was on the perimeter for the front door, and once you were able to get in at the street level, you could access any room, any floor, any safe, because there was nothing else on the inside to prevent you from accessing anything. Well, this is really the risk that you're taking with the network without security segmentation. There's nothing to limit the spread of breaches through lateral movement. So back to the definition in an enterprise environment. Segmentation is a method of isolating and segmenting processes, workloads, applications, or entire environments. And the objectives here are really twofold. Number one, control any communications in and out of the segment. Number two, contain the attack surface and area of compromise. In the case of our breach, the blast radius in our metaphor for the submarines. In our case, access works through something called whitelisting here at Illumio, or a policy that only gives access to approved entities and denies anybody who's not approved, which is usually a much longer list, right? So this default deny posture is aligned with NIST recommendations, it's aligned with zero trust frameworks, it's aligned with the age-old security principle of least privilege. People or workloads should only have access to systems where there is a legitimate business purpose. And the gist of it is just that you don't consider anyone trusted automatically, whether they originate inside or outside your network. You don't want to give access to somebody unless it's formally authorized, you specify. So why does security segmentation matter? Here we see a representation of another breach in recent memory. This is the Target breach. Hackers went in through an HVAC vendor's portal to Target with legitimate credentials. And because of vulnerabilities in that application, we're able to move laterally through the network, just like with the Bangladeshi breach heist for SWIFT, until they reached the point of sale system, at which point they could access information for 70 million customers, which was compromised. And we see this pattern over and over again. Think about SWIFT, right? It turns out that the common denominator of most major breaches is lateral movement or east-west traffic. Threat actors accessing a seemingly low-value system like the HVAC portal and then spreading laterally throughout the network they now have free access to until they get to the point-of-sale system or the SWIFT messaging system. Finally, they reach those high-value assets and they can cause varying levels of damage, loss, theft, or exfiltration of IP. You see here from the numbers on the slide, breaches are very common, and the average dwell time for an infiltrator on your network is about 78 days, at least it was in 2018. Imagine what an attacker can find with 78 days of surveillance on your network. That's nearly an entire business quarter of being in the network and developing a 30-60-90 plan for targeting your key assets. And we see this pattern over and over again. So the question is, once a threat actor has gained access to your network via some low-value asset, what is stopping that lateral movement? What do you have in place to disrupt it? And that's really where security segmentation comes in. So let's talk a little bit about the different approaches to segmentation and how to do this effectively. Typical approaches to segmentation fall into two buckets: traditional network-based segmentation and software-defined networking, or SDN-based segmentation. Now, both of these approaches have some inherent limitations that make segmentation hard. You're dealing with multiple administration points often for all of your different environments that may not be able to have one solution. There's policy tied to IP addresses that is a little bit tough to parse and manage. Applications are often not conveniently located within network boundaries, especially with so much cloud adoption. Finally, inconsistent segmentation capabilities across different devices and environments that make security strategy complicated. So while SDN solutions here on the right provide a critical level of automation that helps to manage and deploy the network, visibility issues there still prevent the automation services from being leveraged to deploy policies across the network devices, which is why we include both kind of in the same bucket here. So these limitations in approach result in some unintended consequences: increased risk of network or applications failing due to inaccurate policies, increased network fragility because it's hard to manage, and lower agility due to a fear of failure. What is it that's making this so fundamentally difficult? Well, security segmentation is hard because networking and segmentation desire opposite outcomes. We build these networks so they're fast, so they're resilient, so they're flexible. They need to run like a utility. The IP protocol was designed to offer seamless connectivity even in the face of multiple network outages. When we use the network to segment, we work against its natural tendencies, and we need to build inspection and enforcement points into the data path. The more control we want, the more intrusions we have to create. So on this slide, if we think of our network like a highway, the segmentation on it is kind of like a toll booth. Some of you may be old enough to remember what a toll booth is. We used to have to stop and manually give a toll booth operator our cash, and this created huge bottlenecks on your drive. If you wanted to expand, all you could do is really create more toll booths, and it slowed down everything. So that was until they invented EasyPass with an RFID chip, and having an EasyPass allows you to seamlessly pay your toll from the privacy of your car, and it barely slows you down. Basically, they decoupled the tolls from the infrastructure of a toll booth, letting you sail through the toll plazas without creating enormous choke points on the highway. So just as we decoupled toll collection from the toll booths and the highway infrastructure, we need to decouple security segmentation from the network architecture. Networks are designed for resiliency, they're designed for performance, essentially connecting things. Segmentation is all about isolating things, and these two objectives are in conflict with each other. In fact, some of our customers have told us they were forced to break their networks to implement security segmentation on the network, taking something that was working and breaking it in order to protect it better. At that point, you might as well just set your money on fire. But what if you could decouple security segmentation from network architecture, making it a non-issue? Well, you can, and let's talk about how. So, what architecturally do you need to decouple? First, you need to go beyond IP addresses. You need a way to group and label logical bunches of things. Second, you need a map to see what is talking to what. You need to understand how your applications communicate within themselves, what they're talking to, and what talks to them. Thirdly, you need a way of drafting, testing, and enforcing policy. And this gives you a way of defining and managing your segmentation safely with less risk of bringing down the network and the business. So let's drill down on each of these just a little bit more. To get beyond IP addresses, we need a way to group and label logical bunches of things. Organizing endpoints into logical groups assigned based on business decisions using a richer context than IP addresses. The answer here is really metadata. Use metadata as a schema to serve as a business logic extrapolation layer, a way to create labels for hosts by role, application environments, and location. The good news is you have this data already from systems of record like your CMDB, Active Directory, hostname conventions, IP address management systems, etc. So it's really there and just needs to be applied through technology. Our customers tell us you can't segment what you can't see. What you need for visibility is a map. A map is critical for two reasons. One, to see what is talking to what. You need to understand how they're communicating within themselves and what's talking to them. Two, it gives you a shared view of the truth. You need operationally to be able to agree on things with your stakeholders. So a map gives you the capability of being able to collaborate on how you secure things or how you change things with all of your stakeholders. You can work together with application owners, with IT ops, with the network and the security folks all together. It helps you validate application configuration and function. It helps you obtain quick agreement on impact of the proposed changes. And finally, it makes it easy for audit and compliance teams to approve segmentation policy, which is often the point in a compliance exercise. So lastly, you need a way of drafting, testing, and enforcing policy. And this gives you a way of defining and managing your segmentation safely without potentially bringing down the network. I can define segmentation for a specific workload, for instance, and then test it without risking any breakage. Compare this to traditional risky ways of implementing new segmentation, maybe over the weekend, and just kind of crossing your fingers that no applications are blocked on Monday. Much more of a trust exercise there. So once these applications and systems can be identified by a label through the metadata, it becomes possible to anchor security policy to each of those labels without consideration for where it might reside on the network. That's really what allows you to decouple from the IP addresses. This means that policies at the application system or process level can all be implemented without any network impact. Our customers tell us this approach is faster, easier, and less expensive because you don't have to re-architect the network, decoupling. It's also less risky. You won't break the network or impact business as usual. So how does it work? Well, at Illumio, we've built two pieces of software to make this decoupled model real. The first is a small agent that we call a virtual enforcement node, or a VEN. But it isn't like any kind of security agent that you're familiar with. It's not inline to traffic. You don't have to recompile a kernel module. There's no heavy CPU load from processing application packets. It's very small in size because it has a simple job: provide application level telemetry and forward it to the central brain. What's it doing? Well, the VEN decouples visibility from the network sources and it enhances visibility down to the process level within monitored systems. The second part of our solution is the Policy Compute Engine, or PCE. You see it over here under Policy Compute Engine. And the Policy Compute Engine takes the decoupled visibility data from the VEN and the label assignment, and it creates an application dependency map, or multiple application dependency maps. The PCE also provides a simple interface with automation that helps build, model, and test a security policy, like we were stating before. And when you're ready, that policy can be pushed down to enforcement points that are already decoupled from the network through your Windows filtering platform or IP tables in Linux. Now, we've already said that our agent is not inline to traffic and can't directly block anything. So what happens next? Well, I was hinting at the VEN receives the segmentation instructions and inserts them into the level 3 and level 4 firewalls that are in every modern operating system. On Windows filtering platform, on Linux, IP tables. Equivalent capabilities are there also for AIX and Solaris. And in this way, we can decouple security policy from the network entirely. The visibility is decoupled and extended via the VEN. The labels with the metadata decouple applications and servers from the network. And the application dependency maps created by the PCE tie it all together into a clean workflow. The existing operating system level firewalls through Windows filtering platform and IP tables decouple the segmentation enforcement from the network because they can be done at the host. So this then creates a virtuous cycle. Any changes to a workload changes the telemetry going back to the VCE. It can compare these changes to the security policy and recalculate the correct rules, and then it pushes them down to the workload firewalls. In this way, security is dynamic, it's automated, it's constantly up to date. Because the PCE is API driven and the policy is label based, it's easy to automate segmentation policy using common automation frameworks. That means security segmentation can keep up with DevOps workflows. So what does this look like in terms of deployment? Well, this is a real quick overview because as we go into the case studies, you're going to need to understand how the process goes as we walk through them. It basically has 5 steps. Once you've nailed down your requirements and decided on a tool from the different options, step 1, the next step is to identify the low-hanging fruit that will give you the biggest return for your efforts. Which segment do you want to segment first? You don't want to boil the ocean all at once. Once you've got that plan, you need to make your application dependencies and map them, see what's talking to what, understand whether it should be talking to that. You need visibility for this because you can't protect what you can't see, right? So next, you build, test, and enforce your policy, and then decide iteratively what to tackle next. We include this last step here to really show you can start out from coarse-grained policy and become more granular as you go. You can also spread through your environment at your own pace. If you know the old joke about how you eat the elephant one bite at a time, instead of that, you can have a phased deployment and not eat the elephant in one bite. So without further ado, let's look at how this is working for customers in meeting their compliance mandates. Often this starts out with the same scenario. They need to prepare for an audit under an extremely compressed time frame, maybe due to a failed pen test. I'm going to warn you right now before we kick off, I cannot name names here, not only because for some reason major corporations don't like to talk about the time they were out of compliance, but also because a number of these folks are in the witness protection program for breaking from their big installed IT vendors and going with a best-of-breed vendor like Illumio. We don't want them to have to go into hiding underground or anything. So this first example is a larger client facing SWIFT obligations. This is a global 250 bank that couldn't scale segmentation across their environment using a firewall-based approach like we were discussing. They were dealing with security product overload, a move to hybrid cloud, and the need for agility in their DevOps IT approach. They really needed something that would govern all of their environments consistently while moving at the speed of their global business across continents, across time zones. And the biggest driver for picking Illumio here was independence from the infrastructure, decoupling from the network like we described. Illumio's ability to work on virtual machines, on-premise, bare metal, or in the cloud, all ensuring consistent security across every environment. Basically, they attempted to scale the existing firewall strategy to do that and were not able to. In terms of the benefits, you'll see here with Illumio, they were able to quickly deploy, gain visibility into their environments in order to design the policy. They could collaborate with application owners to validate that they had the right strategy, as we were discussing, that's part of the process, and then model and test before they enforce to make sure they didn't break anything, just like the process we described previously. So it's really a very straightforward approach, which is why it's ultimately successful. Moving on, this is a large e-commerce vendor dealing with PCI compliance, and because they're an online store, credit cards are a critical function to their business. In this case, the client had failed a pen test and they needed to be in compliance on a very short time frame to prevent the lateral movement within their network in the case of a breach. In PCI, this means isolating your CDE or your cardholder data environment. So they did this via one user segmentation to ensure that only authorized users could access the payment applications via a secure channel. Number two, they did environmental isolation of the CDE, the cardholder data environment, which required network mapping of all Tier 2 services interfacing with the credit card payment and processing systems, including the document management system and Active Directory. And the biggest driver here in using Illumio was really speed and results. As you see in the benefits, there's an emphasis on simplicity of policy design to create rules, being able to manage them without IP addresses or dealing with firewall rules, and rolling it out quickly with minimal training. For these folks, it was really kind of a just-in-time deployment. And so the benefits were really speed, fast turnaround, usability, and just being able to get up and running. I included another PCI case study here because it's a good example of how Illumio can be a good fit for a smaller deployment as well. This customer is a leading resort, but in terms of some of the other businesses we look at in financial services, for example, they're a little on the smaller side. They have a lean IT team to maintain their network with an on-prem POS system, point of sale. And they were looking for something that wouldn't break the bank. They needed it to be easy to deploy. They needed to administer it sustainably without too much manpower. Again, they needed to isolate their cardholder data environment for PCI. So as you can see from the benefits here, the drivers for them were value, number one, but also as part of that, independence from the infrastructure and no need to buy new hardware. Then visibility to understand the traffic on their network so they can design segmentation. Finally, operational simplicity to keep a low administrative burden. I like this example because it shows how you don't have to blow your budget to achieve segmentation. Once you decouple segmentation from the network, it really is cheaper, faster, easier, and safer. And you can start small. There's no need to boil the ocean. Moving on to a healthcare scenario, this customer is a large regional medical group with 400 physicians and PHI over 400,000 patients it needs to protect. So in this case, they had an existing segmentation project that was going out of scope, and they had to scale back their primary objective, which was protecting personal health information at PHI. They needed to identify what was communicating with their systems with PHI, control what can and can't be transmitted, and then get alerts and automated lockdowns on actions that are outside of normal behavior. They were also making a gradual transition to the cloud, which is another regulatory concern because of potential compliance penalties that come with entrusting your data to a third party to secure the data. So again, in the benefits, just-in-time plug-and-play deployment was a key driver, but this is another example of a smaller team fighting security tool overload too, really looking for low training and administrative burden. The visibility was obviously really important to them as well because they needed to confirm access to the systems with PHI and make sure it was validated for the applications involved. But they also really liked the overall usability and ease of design for segmentation, even really granular segmentation down to the process layer. In this case, Illumio wasn't more tool than they needed, which was what they were really getting with other vendors, and it didn't require more training or a lot of overhead to deploy. Okay, so this case is not one of the regular regulatory mandates that we are thinking of in terms of SWIFT or PCI, but this was an audit requirement for a Fortune 100 bank. Basically, they were trading millions and millions of dollars and had an environmental separation issue when their dev moved into their prod, and it became such an issue that auditors came in and were threatening to remove them from global exchanges and levy fines that were really not practical for them as a business. So the challenge was to get this done very quickly. Re-architecting the network, again, was not an option. A, because of the cost, B, because of needing to shut down. The business couldn't afford that. And they went with Illumio really for all of the reasons we've mentioned before. But in terms of the benefits, not re-architecting, going with a host-based segmentation solution, they had tried the network, they had tried a homegrown one, and Illumio was really what worked for them. Ease of deployment, being able to get it taken care of quickly. This was something that went up to the board level and was very high visibility, as many things that we do in our job as security professionals are, so they were able to get it done quickly. Ease of operation, again, it needed to be something they could support with lean operations and with a great deal of automation. Finally, in addition to being helpful to separate their environments, they also help to improve IT efficiency. They're using it to clean up their CMDB to get information on what applications are talking to what and how they're registering that. So this is a use case we see with a lot of different clients looking to clean up CMDBs, which are often not all that accurate. So this is the last one. And again, this is not a regulatory compliance obligation per se, but one based on client audits. A lot of B2B businesses are dealing with financial firms that have third-party obligations around protecting their clients' data, maybe for GDPR, maybe for SWIFT. And these firms get client audit requests pretty regularly to show their work. One example is law firms, where this is becoming more frequent, client audits. Another here is asset management. And this firm was fielding repeated client audit requests to testify to their segmentation strategy. The challenge was really having a consistent, rock-solid audit capability across their data center and multi-cloud. You can see here from the benefits, they wanted to be able to treat all of their environments the same as far as policy is concerned and give a complete categorical explanation of the protections for the client data, on demand, evergreen. Note also the small footprint and ease of deploy, again, without re-architecting the network. For someone dealing with regular client audits, the reporting capabilities are a big value add as well, instead of doing a manual point-in-time audit that's immediately stale and has to be refreshed every time there's a request. With Illumio, you're able to provide a real-time evergreen kind of snapshot on demand. And that is really it for today. I want to thank everybody so much for your time. I hope it's been helpful and ignited your enthusiasm for meeting compliance mandates with security segmentation. I did want to put a quick plug in. If you want to know more about your current security posture and what you need to do, you can go to Illumio and take the Illumio attack surface quiz you see here. It's only 5 multiple choice questions. It gives you an estimate of your attack surface, a benchmark for others in your industry based on survey data, and some valuable free consulting on what you should be looking into for your situation based on a segmentation project you might have in the works. What are your next steps? Well, if you're interested in learning more about Illumio, you can go to this page and take a guided tour, get a custom demo, use the 30-day free trial. If you want to map your application dependencies to understand your environment better, the free trial lets you install the agent. It shows exactly what your application dependencies are, and it lets you view those application dependency maps for 30 days, model your security policies, and learn how segmentation can prevent the spread of breaches in your own environment. It's a great way to visualize things for yourself, and this visibility is really key, the principle of show, don't tell. It can also help all your stakeholders have a common vision and gain alignment. And as we keep saying, you can't protect what you can't see. So that's really it for today. Did we have any Q&A?
We do, yeah, Katie. Great presentation. Thank you so much. I will be sharing those 2 links, the link to the attack surface quiz and the test drive in the audience chat so that everyone out there can easily click on those links and go give these free resources a try for themselves. We do have some questions here for you from the audience. Let's see, first one that came in here, John is asking, when deploying Illumio, can that alone help me to meet my compliance mandates?
Well, wouldn't that be nice? Of course, it's critical for anybody to map the requirements to the frameworks that are put forth by the governing body and go through the regular compliance exercises to make sure you're meeting the standards. It's not as simple as just deploying software. Security segmentation is often the toughest nut to crack in these new regulations coming down, though, which is why we've really focused on making that easy, fast, cheaper, and safer than what's out there already. Obviously, I covered a lot of ground with multiple regulations in this presentation and can't really triple click on any one of them. We're solving specifically for the segmentation and isolation of critical systems here.
Okay, very nice. I like that candid, honest answer there. Illumio is not a silver bullet when it comes to instantly being compliant, but it's a critical piece that I know so many companies struggle with. Next question here, Tom is asking about the case studies. You talked about how the product is easy, fast, and efficient. But he's looking for some specific metrics. Do you have any sort of proof points to help him to find out Illumio's differentiators?
Those definitely exist. There are tangible, quantifiable cost savings. I can point you to the TCO calculator on our website to get an idea of the price differential for one. But I would say that most of these folks, differentiator for them, they were under such tremendous pressure from their regulatory deadlines, from the business, from the board in some case, and from their internal stakeholders who need things to run like a utility, right? So to them, the biggest benefit and differentiator is that they were able to achieve this at all under a deadline. It's kind of a pass-fail grading system. The statistics are, either 100% achieve mission accomplished and pass our audit, or we bring down the network of the business and pursue our career development elsewhere. Because for them, it really wasn't possible to do this through the network or the hypervisor or with a homegrown solution in most of these instances. The deployment just wouldn't have worked. The protection wouldn't have worked. There would have been holes big enough to drive a truck through. And that's if it didn't break everything that was already working in order to protect it in the first place. So the decision they were looking at was really either like a costly failure of deployment that they really couldn't justify, or being able to meet their compliance obligations and move on with their day job. And that's really why we talk about decoupling from the network, because it's binary. You either decouple segmentation from the network, or your security segmentation will not work the way you need it to, which is flawlessly.
Okay, excellent. And then another question here, George is asking just about Illumio. Is it hardware? Is it software? And is your network, infrastructure important in implementing Illumio? I mean, does it need to be compatible in some way?
Illumio is software. It's available either on-prem or SaaS, but it's completely infrastructure agnostic, and that's the biggest differentiator. Because it's host-based segmentation as opposed to from the network or SDN, it goes into the operating system of whatever you're trying to secure, and can do that completely independent of the network. So that's really our main differentiator.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's an important clarification. And then I think the final question we have here, and that is about the 30-day free trial. It says right there on the screen, there's no interruption. Can you talk for a minute about how we can try microsegmentation without, interrupting the network traffic and potentially, causing any downtime? Because I'm sure some people out there might be a little nervous about implementing network, microsegmentation. Could they cause some sort of problem? How is Illumio able to do that?
Well, the events are really installed on the host. They're not touching the network so much at all. And in this case, for the free trial especially, you're going to have the visibility of an application dependency map. But you're not going to be able to, you can model policies and say, this is how I would want things to be talking to each other, and this is how I would want to isolate my systems, but you're not going to be able to enforce them through the free trial. So there's really no danger of breaking the network through, some kind of firewall mismatch anyway, because we've sort of taken the keys away in terms of enforcement. So the free trial is really no obligation, no policy of breakage. Just check it out, see the visibility that you're able to obtain about your environments, and go from there and see if you want to proceed. That's really it.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think for a network person out there, when I think about like Cisco access lists, one of the things you can do at the end of it is permit any, and then log it. So essentially all the traffic is allowed and you're logging what happens. And that's kind of how I envision, what you all are doing here with this illumination, I've heard it called, where you're able to get all the visibility, but get it in a graphical way and see who's talking to who, and really start understanding the flow of the applications and the traffic that's happening on the network. And then only then can you really start segmenting that network and protecting yourself. So really cool solution. I hope everyone out there will give the test drive a try, or at least the guided tour. It's really easy to use and really easy to get started. Katie, it's been a great webinar today. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks so much, David. My pleasure.
And with that, it's time to announce the winner of today's $300 Amazon gift card. That is going out to Richard Romero of Texas. Congratulations, Richard Romero of Texas. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. If you didn't win, feel free to register for future events over at events.actualtechmedia.com. And thank you so much to Illumio and Katie for hosting and presenting on today's event. I learned a lot about microsegmentation. I hope that you did as well. And I hope that you'll give the test drive a try. I posted the link to the test drive as well as the attack surface quiz there in the chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel. I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you on the next event. Bye-bye.